We see some folks that have a really high number, but their risk tolerance is very, very low. That portfolio is going to create less income than a smaller portfolio of someone that has a higher risk tolerance.
You're fine, and you've been fine for a few years. I'm like, I could have retired. Yes, you could have retired.
I want to understand the motivation behind that, because a lot of the time when I work with folks who want to retire early, it's not so much that they want to retire early. They just don't want to work where they're working anymore. Today, we're going to be reviewing the 5 critical warning signs that you could be retiring too early or too late. We're calling this the retirement timing trap. Now, over years, helping folks navigate when to retire, what's the right transition period, we've identified some specific indicators that consistently predict retirement timing problems, and regardless of your portfolio size. Now, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about in this video today. Now, Todd, to show these 5 warning signs, we really have to talk about some pitfalls, but how we can create a retirement that's aligned not only with your values, but with your specific goals.
Okay.
So let's get right into it.
Yeah. So we get people in, you're like, well, how can you retire too late? What's retiring too late? We see a lot of that. We see people who are sad that there's been a medical event between husband or wife or spouses, and they scrimped and saved their entire life, and they don't get to spend it now because one of them had a medical issue, or they just worked so long. And a lot of people tolerate their job. They do it for the money, but if they could retire easily and know that they had enough money, there's a lot of people who are kind of aggravated when we meet with them. It's like, you're fine, and you've been fine for a few years. I'm like, I could have retired. Yes, you could have retired. And so, let's talk about it today because, and retiring too early is obvious. You run out of money, but you can retire too late. So, let's give people 5 warning signs.
There's some great stuff here, and you're already bringing some of them up. The first one that we want to talk about is financial tunnel vision.
Okay.
So this is a really interesting one, and we've talked about this a little bit before, but I like the phrasing of this here. So the thing about financial tunnel vision is you're focusing on a metric that might not be the most important metric. Yeah. And most commonly what we see is you want to hit a certain portfolio size without really having underlying meaning behind that.
Yeah.
If I say, hey, when are you comfortable retiring? And you say, well, when I have $3 million. Say, okay, what does that mean? Why is that the number? And if you don't have a clear answer, and really what I would want to look for is if you don't have a clear answer of how much income after tax adjusted for inflation, you write this down, income after tax adjusted for inflation, what that's going to be and why that's the number, we're focusing on the wrong metric here. And we see it all the time. Oh, when I get to this number, I'll be okay. Everything will be great.
But will you?
And what ends up happening when you get to that number is the goalposts move.
Yeah.
Almost every time. The goalposts move, and it's like, it's not 2 million, now it's 3 million. Now we'll feel comfortable when X. It's like, well, actually the truth is the reason you feel comfortable is not a financial number, it's a behavioral number.
Yeah.
And that's a different problem that we have to solve. So that's the first one. Right.
Yeah, tunnel vision. I mean, in your retirement, it's probably going to be different than everyone else's. If you want to sit around all the time, that's not going to cost much. But if you want to travel and go see the kids and do a lot of things, that's not cheap. And so that's a very different number.
And the key, I think, is we're not saying to dismiss numbers or not to know your numbers, but we're saying you need to use the right numbers as the benchmark here, which ultimately, if we can boil down retirement, it's income. Retirement runs on income, period. And so if we don't know what the portfolio can create in terms of income, it doesn't matter how big the number is. Right. We see some folks that have a really high number, but their risk tolerance is very, very low, and that portfolio is going to create less income than a smaller portfolio of someone that has a higher risk tolerance. Yeah. And so there's all kinds of details about how do we translate that to income for your specific situation. How much income can it create? But even more importantly, how much income do you actually need? That's really what we need to figure out. And so, it's important to get the numbers right. You just need to focus on the right. Let's go to the next one. Number 2, the psychological resistance pattern.
What's that mean?
I don't know anything about this. You kind of brought it up just a moment ago, Todd.
Okay.
It's like, well, when we get there, we'll feel better. Like, oh, when we get to this number, everything will be fine. When we get $100,000 a year in income, or when we get to, $2 million in the IRAs, then we'll retire. Then we'll be fine. Then we'll be comfortable.
These are the people who end up working way too late and come to find out they were okay. They just didn't think they were okay. That's a real psychological issue.
Yeah, and it's really more about a lot of the time and I don't want you to feel like I'm being critical of you if you feel this way.
Sure.
And so I want to be thoughtful about the way that I say this, but I want to encourage you, think through your motivation for working versus not working. I think that's a really important thing. If you're someone who's really eager to retire early, what I would ask is, okay, then what? What are you going to do then? You want to retire at 55? Great. Then what? What's the plan? How are you going to spend your time? How are you going to spend your money? How are you going to spend your energy, your attention? Are you going to volunteer? Are you going to travel? And I'm not trying to pester you, but I want to understand the motivation behind that, because a lot of the time when I work with folks who want to retire early, it's not so much that they want to retire early. They just don't want to work where they're working anymore.
They want to do something different.
They want to do something different. And I think, and that's okay, but let's get clarity on that, because what ends up happening if you think that retiring early is going to solve the problem, but it doesn't actually solve the problem, then we're just moving to a different excuse.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people are financially prudent. Okay. You're very prudent saving, not spending too much money. But as you move into retirement, that financial prudence really becomes financial unreadiness. You don't know the numbers, or a lack of financial knowledge to know how does this number convert to income, which is what you're going to need once you quit working.
Well, that's a huge point.
Yeah, thank you.
The numbers that matter in retirement are different than the numbers that matter when you're saving for retirement.
Right.
That's what I was thinking as you're talking about that. I'm like, yeah, a lot of our clients, they're savvy. They've saved well. They don't overspend. They've been diligent about saving and investing, and they don't have everything right, but they get a couple of those things right. But the numbers that matter in retirement are different. What percentage of your portfolio are you taking for income? Where does your income come from? How much are you paying in taxes? It's a different conversation.
In your financial advisor that got you to this point, accumulating funds, did a really good job of that. You now need a specialist who kind of undoes that, but undoes it in a very conscious way of retirement. A retirement financial advisor, which is us, is very different than an accumulation advisor. And people think I'm having an advisor and they will work with me all the way through this process. And I think a lot of people make mistakes. And I think sometimes the advisor, just like attorneys who don't recognize the fact that they can't do a really good estate plan, or they don't understand Medicaid, you need to go see a specialist. And particularly with financial people, you need to go see a financial advisor who understands retirement and how to switch from accumulation to income.
It's incredibly complex.
And
I think that's something that surprises people, how complex retirement really is.
Sure.
And planning for retirement. Even really, really savvy. I work with a lot of DIY investors that want to do their own, they think they've got it. They want a second opinion. I've never, ever in that found someone who didn't have something that we could optimize.
Sure. Always.
And most of the time it's significant, really significant.
Just $1 million or $2 million in tax savings, or
I mean, it's a couple million between friends, right? But and look, we can't look at this as beating yourself up trying to go back. But if you found out that you could save money, would you like to do that now or in 10 years when we have less time to adjust?
Sure.
Or if you found out that you could retire a couple of years ago, wouldn't it have been nice to find that out a couple of years ago? And so figuring out what you want to do in retirement is really important, and what's your motivation for retirement. You might just need a sabbatical. You might just need to take a couple months off.
Yeah.
Or to go into a consulting role. And a lot of what we work with our clients is figuring out how that works and really when the right time to retire is.
Sure.
And there's a psychological component to it, not just the financial component to it. And so we kind of blended this together with number three. Number three, we call it the escape fantasy. This is kind of tied into the second one in my mind. It's, they're not really, sometimes folks that I visit with that just got to get out no matter what, they're not going to something, they're trying to get out of something. Yeah. And that's a trap. And that's really risky, because what's going to happen 2 months into retirement when you feel like you've got to get out from that? This is hard stuff, and humans need a sense of purpose. They need a sense of working towards things. They need a sense of community. And so solving for some of those things, not just, how do I quit doing the grind anymore, is a really important adjustment.
There's a whole lot there. And being pushed from something is different than being pulled to something. Mm-hmm. You want to be pulled to retirement. You want to know that you're going to do something rather than I've just got to quit this job and get out. You quit that and it's like, okay, now what? Whereas if you're being pulled to it, you always have a goal to reach toward.
Well, and I think it's so important too. The folks that we see, that I think about, who, I help them retire, that want to get out. Sure. And I'll do it. But they also tend to be the ones that struggle the most with that transition when they just want to get out. They're not going towards something. Yeah. There's no vision here. Mm-hmm. And statistically, the folks who get sick and pass away early are the ones who don't retire to purpose. I mean, you've seen this all the time. Mm-hmm. They don't have something that they're going to. They're just done. And if we're not careful, that can be a big trap.
Warning sign number 4 is you have to realize what we're calling the income disconnect. You think you're not going to spend as much in retirement. But as we say, in retirement, every day is Saturday. When do you spend the most money? Probably on Saturday. Yeah. This past Saturday, I went to Home Depot 3 times.
Oh, boy.
I was doing a home project and went to Home Depot 3 times. And you cook out, you go out, you do things. Well, that's probably every day in retirement. And you may not fully understand how your income may change, may go up, may go down, but probably is going to stay about the same.
Well, I think a lot of this comes from there are these certain, widely held rules of thumb and beliefs about retirement that pretty much all of them end up not being true when you actually do it. So one of them is that you're going to spend less in retirement because maybe you'll have the house paid off or you won't be working, and so you'll spend less. That did happen for what we call the greatest generation, the Depression era generation. But very candidly, those folks were built differently than the people that are retiring now. This is my experience. This is anecdotal, okay? Now, all the advisors I talk to, that I work with, say that that's the same thing. So, take that with a grain of salt. But the generation that's retiring now, they don't tend to decrease their spending. In fact, especially if they take our advice, sometimes they increase their spending.
They do.
Because what they've realized is that your time in retirement is not guaranteed. You're not guaranteed a 40-year retirement. Mm-hmm. We're going to plan for that, and we need to. Mm-hmm. But you're not guaranteed that. Your health may fail, things may change. I mean, we need to think differently about this. And so applying rules of thumb to your retirement, it's just not a good strategy. And I think that's what really this talks about is, the things that you spend money on may be different than what you spent money on when you were working. That's a whole other view of this. And so figuring out what's important to spend money on, not just what you default to spending money on, I think is a really helpful exercise for people. This is a tough one.
All right. We saved this one for last because I have seen this before. I have seen where the couple aren't of the same mindset when it comes to retirement. Talk about that.
So we call this one the relationship readiness gap. Now, if you're single or if you're not married or if you don't have a partner, this can be your relationship with yourself. Okay. So I think it's fair to still apply this. And how do you view retirement? And are you doing the things that you want to be doing? Are your goals consistent with your actions? And if we're honest, there's always opportunity for overlap. But when we add a partner into this, or friends or other relationships, this can become more complex. Mm-hmm. But Todd, to your point, when one spouse is ready to retire, the other spouse isn't. One wants to travel, the other one doesn't. When your goals and when your behaviors and what you want to accomplish is different than your partner or your friends or whomever it is in retirement, that can be a big challenge.
Yeah, and you don't want to think about divorcing during this time period, but sometimes talk about it early. Okay,
Yeah.
Bring this up now, whatever age that you are. Say, what is our retirement going to be? Do we want to travel? Do we want to stay home? Do we want to do an RV? Do we want to fly all over the world? I mean, you've got to figure that out, and you've got to agree on the financial arrangement to support that.
Well, and I think a big piece of this is you're going to have to compromise on stuff, most likely. And so if you're going to assume anything, assume that you're not on the same page about everything.
Okay.
And that would seem obvious, but we find that folks, they just figure that their partners are going to want to do the same stuff that they do when they retire. And it's rarely the case. If you're those rare folks, we'd love to work with you because it'd be a whole lot of fun. But and a lot of folks, by the time they get to this age, they've typically been together for a long time, and so they understand some of these things. But the point is, talk about it. Talk about not just how you're going to come up with income. That's important. But what are you going to spend that income on? Work through like a day in the life, a month in the life, a year in the life of y'all being retired. What is that going to look like? A fun exercise is you get a piece of paper, your partner gets a piece of paper, and you write down day, month, year. What are the things that you're doing on the average day, the average month, the average year? Don't talk to each other. You spend 20 minutes, come back and compare notes. See how much overlap you have. This is always an eye-opening experience.
Right.
And it helps to get clarity on some of these things. So you've seen the 5 warning signs that indicate that you might be retiring too soon or maybe too late, depending on your situation. You understand a little bit more about why retirement timing involves not just the financial aspect of it, but also your behavioral and some of the philosophical things as well. And so by focusing on aligning your financial, psychological, behavioral values, your social readiness, you can determine your optimal retirement timing and avoid both the financial strain of retiring too early and the lost opportunity cost of retiring too late. But if you're still worried about how to correctly time your retirement, click the link in the description. Fill out a complimentary questionnaire. We will create a quick video based on your information and send it to you and help you to understand where you're at in this process. We'll send that video over. Now you have to put your email in there because if you don't put your email, we don't know who to send it to. Okay, and so we'll give you some ideas about how to strengthen your plan and give you some ideas about when you can retire based on your situation.
See you next time.
We'll see you next time.